Hi all, and welcome to another installment of your Daily Cues. Today I want to look at a game between Magnus Carlsen and Vasily Ivanchuk that was played during the first round of the Aerosvit tournament in Foros, on the Black Coast Sea. This game struck me as being a very subtle game, very interesting game, and a very good example of Magnus Carlsen's steadiness and professionalism nowadays. Also, we can clearly see his style from this game. Usually he prefers simpler variations over complications. So he was playing white and Ivanchuk was playing black. Let's take off. d4. It's a King's Indian defense. Ivanchuk has been playing this a bit more often lately. And it's the classical line, where black plays now knight c6, and after d5, knight e7, white plays the so-called bayonet attack, which is considered to be the most dangerous method nowadays. Okay, a few more theory moves follow. Rook e1 makes the square on f1 available for the bishop. It could go there if the black knight would want to go to f4, for instance. But Ivanchuk plays f5 here. But now, of course, with this move he weakens the e6 square and Magnus jumps in knight g5. Now knight f6 retreats. f3, bolstering up his strong point in the center on e4. King h8, removing his king from the white squares, where white is strongest, of course. And now an interesting move followed. I think the most usual move here to play is something like bishop e3, and then there could follow the funny move bishop h6, knight f7 check, rook takes f7, and bishop takes h6. And although white has the pair of bishops, black has at least managed to exchange his dark squared bishop, which is usually his bad squares bishop in this King's Indian game. Okay, well that's not what happened, but after king h8, Magnus played b5. Now that's an interesting move. It tries to create a clamp on these white squares here, which is where white is strongest. You can see that he's got all these pawns, located on white, whereas black has got them located all on black squares. So that's an indication that white could follow a white square strategy and that black could follow a black square strategy. But in playing b4, b5, he also, of course, weakens the c5 square. But at the moment that's not really such a big problem, because if black wanted to try and go there with knight e7 to c5, then all of a sudden this square on e6 would no longer be protected, and then the white knight would jump in and create a double attack on queen and rook, and thus winning at least the exchange. Okay, so let's see how the game continued after b5. Ivanchuk played knight e8, and this move looks a bit strange, but is actually part of a logical regrouping plan. The knight plans to go to g7, as we will see later. Now Carlsen played bishop e3, and Ivanchuk continued with his plan. And he played f6 here, bishop f6 I should say, attacking the knight on g5 here, and also threatening to exchange it, after which he would have gotten rid of his bad bishop. I think, however, that it might have been more precise for Ivanchuk not to play bishop f6 immediately, but after bishop e3 to start with f4, to block this bishop from going to h6, as we will see later. So there could follow bishop f2, and only now bishop f6, knight e6, after all that's where the knight wanted to go, forcing the exchange not of the black squared bishop, but of the white squared bishop. Bishop takes e6, pawn takes e6, and now knight g7. And although white has gained the bishop pair, and he has very strong pressure, of course, on these white squares, also because he still has his own white squared bishop, black is going to win this pawn here, and probably the game will be dynamically balanced in this case. Okay, let's go back to the game, where after bishop e3, Ivanchuk played an immediate bishop f6. Now also Carlsen played knight e6, of course, forcing the exchange of the bishop. And now knight g7 follows, preparing to take the pawn on e6. But there is a difference here, because since black has not played f5, f4, white can now play, and that's also the game move, bishop h6. And in doing so, he pins this knight to the rook on f8. I suppose Ivanchuk saw this coming, and he never really thought about playing f5, f4, but just thought about sacrificing an exchange. So now he takes on e6, so that's already one pawn to the good. But now, of course, white takes the exchange, and black recaptures. So we have a material imbalanced position, where white has a rook for a pawn and a knight. Another big difference is, of course, these two bishops here. This one is of the white squares, and this one is of the black squares. And I suppose you could still say that white is following a white square strategy and black a black square strategy. And it would be logical for white to play a move like bishop d3 now, bolstering up his strong point again here in the center on e4, and maybe sometimes preparing to take on f5. But instead of playing bishop d3 after queen f8, Carlsen plays another move, a very interesting move. And it also has to do with the white square strategy. He sacrifices another pawn. He plays c4, c5. Now let's see how the game continues. Of course Ivanchuk took this pawn, and now he has got a very strong knight on c5. And this knight here is practically unassailable. At least it's not going to be attacked by any white pawns anymore. Any other options would be an attack by the white knight, maybe like this, or this, or this. Sorry, this is a wrong arrow, I will improve that. But yeah, in the worst case scenario, that could only lead to an exchange of the knights, right? And furthermore, this knight is sitting on a black square, and it is kind of balancing the power of white on the white squares, you know, because of course it is also attacking all these white squares. So in a sense, I suppose this is nice for black. But why did Carlsen play it? Well, his next move explains it. He plays bishop c4. So there used to be a pawn on c4, but now he can put his bishop there. And of course this bishop is looking all the way to g8 and now has a very active diagonal. Okay, so Carlsen improved his bishop. Now Ivanchuk improves his bishop. He puts it on this diagonal. Of course, a very active diagonal for him also. Now white plays queen e2, and black activates the queen. And now there's a cooperation between the queen here and the bishop here, and black is now threatening to play bishop d2, attacking both the rook and the knight. So white defends against that threat with rook a d1, and Ivanchuk now played rook f8. He's just slowly bringing all his pieces to the king side, where he has the best attacking chances. Instead of rook f8, he also could have threatened mate with bishop f4. Sorry, bishop f4 I meant. And this threatens mate, or at least a winning attack on h2. And he probably didn't do that because white has got quite a simple defense in playing g3. And now black has nothing better than to just go back with the bishop. And white can now, yeah, more or less for free consolidate his king position a little bit with king g2. This means the king is no longer on a black square, and he has been able to put this pawn here on g3, which also balances a lot of a bit of these black squares. So that's probably why Ivanchuk played rook f8 in the game. Okay. Now White continued with a4, just strengthening his position on the queen side. And Black also does the same. He strengthens his position on the queen side with b6. But I suppose that this move has got some consequences, because it creates these holes here on the white squares. And also, even though it's very far away from the white pieces, this pawn here on a7 is sticking out like a sore thumb. And it's of no relevance whatsoever for the rest of the game, or maybe it should be in the endgame. But there is a line further down the road where White could switch in ideas and maybe try to attack over the a file and round up the a7 pawn. Okay, let's have a look what would have happened if Carlsen would have tried to attack over the a file immediately with a move like a5. Then Black would take on a5, and if now rook a1 to try and enter over the a file, that would falter again to bishop d2. So at the moment it is not possible for White to attack on the a file. Also, after b6 it was possible to play knight d5, of course. And then an interesting line would be knight takes a4, because now this pawn is undefended. And the knight now maybe wants to jump into c3, so White plays rook d3, and the knight goes back to the center of the board, and now rook a3, attacking the pawn here on a7. We mentioned it earlier. They could follow knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, but now Black has the in-between bishop d2 again, and after rook d1 there is the strange, funny, complicated, passive, whatever you want to call it, bishop a5. And Black is blocking the a file, and I suppose this is a completely unclear position, you know. Black has got 8 pawns for the exchange, 8 minus 5 is 3 pawns, and a knight for the exchange, and I really don't know what's going on here. So this probably explains, completely according to style, why after b6 Carlsen chose to play the more clear g3. Okay. Of course, in playing g3 he weakens this square on h3, and Black goes for it immediately, queen h3. But putting his queen on h3 also means that there is no coordination anymore over this diagonal. But first Carlsen plays queen g2. Of course he wants to exchange queens, because then he will have better chances in the endgame, no doubt, because his king will no longer be in danger of being attacked on the king side. But Ivanchuk moves back, of course, here, queen h6. And now they move around a bit, queen h3. And of course Carlsen could have taken the draw here with queen g2, but he decides to play for a win. He plays here king h1. And apparently Ivanchuk also felt obliged now to play for a win, or try to bring some complications into the game. What he didn't play, what he could have played, was f4. This has the advantage that it loosens the black squares on White's king side, but it has the disadvantage that it blocks this diagonal. In this line there could follow g4, and now a consolidating move or a preparational move like king g7, maybe intending to bring the rook here and to play h5, you know, and breaking up the h file with probably very serious pressure against White's king position over the h file. But White would also have challenges in playing rook a1, and usually the idea of attacking on the queen side with rook a1 and a4 a5 was not possible, because somewhere down the road Black would have this bishop coming to d2, you know, and attacking the rook and the knight, or just going all the way to a5. But of course with this pawn here on f4 that is no longer possible. So in this position I suppose chances would also be more or less equal. Okay. However, after king h1 Ivanchuk did not play f4, but he played knight d7. And it's almost as if he's saying, okay, my knight is beautiful on c5, you know, it's attacking a lot of things, but it's really quite lonely out there on the queen side, and really where the action is going on is on the king side, and I've got to help my mates over there in trying to create a really dangerous attack, you know. I'm just sitting here beautifully on c5, but hey, it's not bringing us anywhere, right? So knight d7. But now Carlsen sees his opportunity and plays rook a1. Now Ivanchuk retreats the queen, but also, of course, is again threatening bishop d2. So there is no way that white can play a4, a5 now. He first has to defend against the threat of bishop d2, and he does that in playing rook a2. But he has managed to put his rook on a little bit better place, because now it is protecting d2 from the side, but it is also behind his own a pawn on the a file. So in the future, his attack on the a file will be quicker. Okay, knight f6 is now played. Of course, the knight is going all the way over to the king side, and white is coming up with his king, just protecting his pawns here a little bit. And Ivanchuk could have played f4 again now, because there is a tactical possibility in the position. Normally, white would like to keep the position close and play g4 in this position. But when the knight is on f6, that's not possible, because black would simply take this pawn, and you cannot take the knight because of this very nasty f3 check, winning the queen and the game. So after f4, probably white would be forced to retreat his king again to bring the queen into the defense. For instance, king g1, exchanging on g3, and after a move like queen h3, he has a move like queen h2. And this would also lead to a more or less balanced position. Okay, but after king g2 in the game, he didn't play f4, which would probably have been the best move, but he plays knight h5, hoping for some tactical chances that never really occur in the game. Of course, it was very difficult for Ivanchuk to foresee this, but, well, he has to try something, right? Okay, now Carlsen could have played rook c2 here. Let's add that move here. Yeah, and this already prepares the clearing of the c file and the attack of the other sore thumb, which is of course here on c7. But this move will be played later on in the game, and instead of playing rook c2 immediately, he first plays knight d5. And yeah, in doing so he brings a piece that is on the queen side to the center, and if he can exchange it for the knight on e7, then the knight on e7 will never be able to participate in any kingside attack, and maybe the advantage of the exchange will become more obvious, and of course the c file gets cleared, so the attack on the c file is more real. Okay, there was an exchange on d5, bishop d5, and here Ivanchuk played bishop f4, and that is probably a mistake, because now white is really gradually getting some kind of an advantage. Again, it was possible for him after bishop d5 not to play bishop f4, but pawn f4. With the knight on h5, white can now of course push g4, and after knight f6, there again is the threat of knight takes g4, but after bishop e6, white is defending and is now very solid here on these white squares. Okay, let's see how the game continued after bishop f4. Let's go to that moment. Of course, the bishop cannot be taken because of knight takes f4, attacking both queen and king, so black would be winning. But it would have been a good possibility here for white to take on f5. Carlsen did not play that, but it looks like a strong move. It leads to some complications, and that probably explains why Carlsen played another move in the game. We will see that shortly. But this line could follow g5, bringing the king vis-a-vis, the black queen vis-a-vis the white king, and thereby threatening to take here on g3. For instance, after f takes g6, which would be a mistake, that would follow bishop takes g3, and after a move like this, that would follow again a double attack on king and queen, of course. So after queen g5, white could move his queen out of harm's way with queen d1, for instance. Now there would be no more double attack on f4. Then after rook f5, g4, e4, f takes e4, rook f8. Black certainly has some compensation here on all these black squares, but if we look at the pawn count, it's it's brought down to one pawn down for the exchange, and now the f-file has opened up. So this means that white could play something like rook f2, and this rook, of course, is now in danger of getting exchanged. So all the black pieces may not have enough strength anymore to really pose a serious threat to the white king. Okay, well, the move that Carlsen played in the game was also strong. He played queen f2, overprotecting the g3 square, and of course also removing this queen from a possible attack by the knight if it were ever to come to f4. Now there was an exchange on e4, and Carlsen recaptures with the bishop, of course, because after f takes e, again, bishop takes g3 is possible, and there is a discovered attack on the queen. So after f takes e4, he takes with the bishop on e4. And queen g5 was now played by Ivanchuk, again bringing this queen vis-a-vis to the white king. But there is no immediate threat here, and now white has time to continue with his own plan. And that is, of course, rook c2, attacking this sword thumb here on c7. And I suppose both players were in time trouble, or at least Ivanchuk, and most tenacious would probably have been just to try and defend this pawn with a move like rook f7. Although at this moment white still has a serious edge. He can play bishop b7, of course, which is a very funny move, and the idea is to play around this bishop to c8 and maybe harass this rook here, or try to put it here, you know. So he really has a very strong defense on the king side. But after rook c2, Ivanchuk did not play rook f7, but he played d5, and that is based on a wrong calculation or a wrong assessment of the resulting positions. Because now this only really leads to an exchange of light pieces, and after that white simply has a winning endgame. Let's see what happened. Carlsen took the pawn, and now black took this pawn, and white recaptured, and now the double attack again with the knight on f4, but it's not against king and queen, but against king and bishop, of course, because the bishop was lured to d5. Okay, but there followed king f1, knight takes d5, but after rook c e2, switching from the c file to the e file, it really turns out that white now has a winning advantage, because this pawn is a goner. So Ivanchuk decides to make the best of it. He plays queen f6, protecting the f3 pawn, but now there's an exchange of pawns. Takes on e5, takes on f3, exchange on f3, and now the very strong and precise king e2, with a double attack on the rook, and of course there was also an attack of this rook on the knight. And it is not possible for black to play his rook to d3 to defend his knight, because d3 is of course not possible. The white king would simply take the black rook, as we can see after a move like king g2, because then rook d2 would be possible. Okay, but in the game, rook f3 check, king e2, very strong move, this secures the win. So now the only move not to lose a piece for black is rook f5, but then of course white exchanges, and now black is left with a very weak knight against a very strong white rook, and he also has no time to play knight c3 to win this guy, because it is not his move, and of course white protects now against his threat with king d3, and after c5 there followed another double attack with rook e5, knight b4 check, and after king d2 black resigned. Well, I thought that this is a very interesting game, again with lots of subtleties. I doubt if black should have allowed the exchange sacrifice. He could have played f5, f4 earlier, you know, at this stage. He could have tried f4 so as to block this bishop on e3 from coming to h6. I think that was a very significant moment. And then there were some significant other moments, maybe in this position black could have tried f4, and of course in this position black could have tried to play rook f7 instead of the losing d6, d5. Well, this game has shown Magnus Carlsen in a very mature way. That brings us to the end of this video analysis. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please leave your comments on chessdelic.com, share your thoughts on this game with me, and please, until next time, bye bye.